Anyway, if you could bear with me, I don't know an awful lot about him because I've only really started researching him. But I find the interesting and fascinating part of his story is that he actually did come into Inishowen.
Right.
Whenever St. Patrick, as you know, was arrived in Ireland as a slave, he escaped and went back to England. And when he returned to Wales, he had a calling to come back to Ireland. He had 4 different callings to come back to Ireland, but that kind of happened over the course of a number of years. It's not like he arrived back from Ireland and got a calling and came straight back. He was actually I used to think as a child that he was a legendary figure like Cú Chulainn, but he actually was a very real person. And he, after he had escaped and he got the calling to come back, he refused to go back. He didn't feel qualified or equipped to go back and help the Irish. So he basically didn't listen to the first calling because he thought he was hearing voices in his head or having weird dreams. And then he got a second one, and I think when he got the second one, he then decided to become a priest. So he set off to France, where his uncle was a bishop, a well-known bishop to this day, called St. Martin of Tours. He died in 397 AD, and he gave St. Patrick his monastic habit in France, and he spent the best part of 7 or 8 years in France. And then he went to the Vatican to be ordained. He was ordained by the Bishop of Auxerre in 418 AD. But that's the backdrop to it. He then got his orders to go to Ireland. He wanted to go to Ireland, and he was very. You can see from his career, he wanted to do everything right. He didn't want to come over ill-equipped. He wanted to come over with everything that he would have needed to do this incredible project. And then as I started reading into it, I was shocked to see that he came into Inishowen. So he went up to Green Navalia in his travels when he arrived. I suppose the first story is when he arrived in Ireland, he was actually quite smart. He knew that the High King of all of Ireland, based his power in Meath, and that every year on Easter he lit a fire on the top of the mountain in Meath there, Tara, and nobody was allowed to light a fire before his, and if you did, it was punishable by death. So St. Patrick climbed the Hill of Slane and lit a fire before the king lit his fire, at which point the pagans that were advising the king of the day were furious, but even they knew the threat that existed from him lighting this fire. So the pagans instructed the king to obviously bring forward for having lit the fire, and said that if you don't, this fire that St. Patrick has lit on the Hill of Slane will spread all over Ireland. They kind of had a prophecy of it, if you like. So the king descends on St. Patrick at Slane and instructs his soldiers to put St. Patrick to the sword. And it's when you read the diaries of St. Patrick, because St. Patrick didn't arrive in Ireland on his own, he came with an entourage who recorded all of his travels and his dealings. So it's quite well recorded. In fact, his ordination, the documents for his ordination are still sitting in the Vatican to this day, if anybody could ever get into the archives. So whenever the king tried to kill him, St. Patrick killed one of his soldiers, basically supposedly through the power of God. But after that, he won favour with the king, and he was given permission to evangelise Ireland. Yeah. And that's when he starts travelling around and fighting with pagans at every turn and every opposition that he got. He finally arrives up in Inishowen, because this is the bit that's relevant to us, and he had to go up to Green Navalia to get permission from the chief at the top of Green Navalia to evangelise Inishowen. And the chief gave him permission, and he set off. And that's what intrigues me, because if he set off from Green Navalia up at Burt there to come into Inishowen, then he would have almost certainly have walked down the beaches of Buncrana, which I found fascinating. You were talking 1,500 years ago. St. Patrick walked effectively through what would have been Buncrana then, you know.
Yeah.
I'll just read a wee excerpt here for you, just to let you see. From Royal Aleph, Patrick set out with his usual familia to preach the gospel in Owen's Island. Inishowen deserves the name, for it is almost entirely surrounded by the sea, except at the narrow neck of Derry to Inch. So the slablands were underwater there at birth back 1,500 years ago. So Inishowen was literally an island with a very narrow road out to it, which I find interesting. As Patrick set out from Ailach, he probably went by Burnfoot to Buncrana and then travelled along the western slopes of Slieve Shanacht to the fertile valley beyond its snowy summit. and that's recorded in the tripartite into the territory of Fergus, son of Owen. So he arrives in Inishowen. He asks for permission to build a church in the first village that he stopped at in Inishowen. He was refused permission, and he moved, whoever they were. I'd love to know who they were. They refused him permission to build a church. Right. And then he headed into Carndonagh and built the first church in Inishowen. And he actually, in his diaries, he actually records that he particularly liked Inishowen. I think when you read it and you see the descriptions that he's giving, I think it's the Isle of Doe he's referring to. He thought it was beautiful and he fell in love with it. But of course, he had to head on then on his mission. So he heads off down by Mayo and that, and so it's all recorded there. It's a huge journey, a huge project to research him, but it's got the makings of a great film, So if somebody has a phone number for Mel Gibson, maybe we should try and get him to make a film about St. Patrick, because the story is really fascinating,
Or Pierce Brosnan or Liam Neeson, they're both in the country, I think, at the minute. But anyhow, St. Patrick didn't get permission to build a church at Slieve but went on and did get permission in Carndonagh and built a church there. He actually wrote a poem about Donegal as well, and as regards the chiefs that gave him permission to canvass or evangelise in Inishowen, he put a blessing on them, which I thought was very funny. He said, "Whenever you or your successors, after you put your foot out of bed, the men of Erin will tremble before you." So right. Strong stuff.
He put a blessing on the men of Inishowen and said that when we put our feet out of the bed, the whole of Ireland will tremble before us. I used to look at my own sons and I used to think the problem is getting their feet out of the bed.
Yeah, indeed. A lot can relate to that. And what about the famous banishing of snakes from Ireland? Can you tell us anything on that?
I think that's symbolic. I mean, as Dana said earlier, there Ireland was a very dark place with child sacrifice, etc., going on. Yeah. In many ways, people would say Ireland's just as dark today as it was then, but the banishing of the snakes was really more symbolic of the conversion of Ireland to Christianity. Okay. Ireland, the amazing story of Ireland, and there's a priest there, Father Chris Alar, if anybody wants to look him up. He's an American priest. He used to be an engineer and he trained to be a priest. He's now ordained a priest. He's fascinated with St. Patrick as well. He was able to highlight that St. Patrick is the patron saint of engineers, believe it or not. Oh. But basically what he highlighted was that Ireland was one of the first countries in the Western world to be Christianized, and that it became a powerhouse, almost like an engine for the Catholic Church to spread Christianity across the world. It was really from Ireland that Christianity survived the Dark Ages and spread all over the world. St. Column up here from Donegal himself, he ended up being one of the first printers, if you like, or publishers of the Bible, and setting up monasteries all over Europe. So you can see Ireland, when John F. Kennedy came to Ireland, he referred to Ireland as the land of saints and scholars in his speech. That we do have a reputation because we were the powerhouse of the Catholic Church for the whole world. If you go to Nigeria today, Ireland is celebrated in Nigeria because of all the good works of the missionary priests there,
And you said earlier that St. Patrick was someone who, it would seem, liked to do things the right way. It took him a long time to train as a priest. Would that have been the norm back then? Because he went to France first and then went from there over to Rome. And is it something like 15 years in total? Yeah. I think it was 10 anyway. Oh, he spent a long time with his uncle in Tours in France under a monastic habit there. So, it did take some time before he came back. I know that we all like the romantic story of he just turned on his heels in Wales and came back to Ireland, but he didn't. He came back well equipped and he came with an entourage. And, so it was, you can see like the task of converting Ireland back from paganism is a huge undertaking, But in saying that too, he had his prophecies as well. He said that the faith in Ireland will die down to burning embers and sparse locations, which we're starting to see now. Church attendance and mass is very, very low, and all over Ireland it's suffering. Ordinations are way down. Vocations are way down. But on a more positive note, he says that the faith will roar back from Ulidia, which is north. I was trying to figure out where that was. I had to get old maps to try and find where Ulidia is in Ireland. And it turns out Ulidia is Downpatrick, where St. Patrick actually, they believe, is buried. So that was interesting too. Okay.
And then, of course, there's other prophecies flying around that Patrick said in the final days of Ireland will slip beneath the waves. So thereby bringing
global warming
it to Ireland. Global warming,
Yeah.
perhaps, yeah. But that's all I know about him so far.
No, that's good. Keep digging, Christopher. And it'd be too bad if our patron saint couldn't have a strong connection to Donegal, and it's great to get a bit of an insight. Thanks, Christopher.
Well, they know he built the first church in Cairns, so if anybody can find it, it would be pretty amazing. But Colgan is a historian up in Carndonagh. Colgan Hall was named after him. He spent a lot of his life trying to find where he built that first church. So it's apparently built near a river called Ace McNirk. It is a ledge of rock in a mountain stream that comes down from Slieve Snart, over which the water leaps into a deep pool below.
Well, if anybody comes across it, let us know. For sure.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Christopher.
Okay.